Are video games bad for you? At least that's what your parents, your teachers, and even former President Trump say.
There's a lot of bad things are happening to young kids and young minds, and their minds are being formed. And we have to do something about
He's not the first to say that playing video games makes you violent. This debate has been around for over 40 years. But where does the truth lie in all of this? In today's video, we'll uncover all the ideas received about video games, and even those you might have. Do video games make you violent? For 40 years, they've been telling us the same thing. Video games are a dangerous activity that makes people aggressive. The first polemics go back to the 90s over a well-known game, Mortal Kombat, released in 1992. It surprises everyone with its realistic graphics and its violent side. If you know how to play, you can kill your opponent in bloody ways. The kids rush to the game to try them all. It's a panic. Every media outlet talks about it. We talk about a game that glorifies violence and teaches children the pleasure of inflicting the most terrible form of cruelty they can think of. Wolfenstein 3D and Doom are released at the same time. Bloody, as popular as it is, turns what was now a contemporary controversy into an enormous social debate. The video game industry is forced to create the ESRB to rate titles by age whenever the game contains an insult or a drop of blood. Even Pokémon was accused of Satanism in 2000. It was necessary for the Pope himself to give his blessing to the game so that everyone could stop being afraid of it. Some critics seem more serious. Studies came out to show the links between video games and violence. The first argument is that seeing violence on the screen banalizes it and conditions our behavior. Well, we should be careful not to generalize. Video games is a very large industry with radically different experiences. Some titles do not contain any form of violence, yet they're put into the same group as all the others. After all, it's been 30 years, and the most popular games are often those with guns, most with very detailed graphics. Wouldn't crushing old ladies in GTA make you want to do the same thing in real life? This simply isn't true. Studies have shown it. The content of the game itself has little impact on the player's brain, even with super graphics. What it retains is mostly the fundamental actions that it performs, like in an FPS, aligning the cursor and clicking on a target. Of course, we can have bad representations of violence and war, but it's an argument that we could also apply to the movies or books. After that, we can point at all the Gamer Rage videos. But be careful not to confuse aggression and frustration. It's certain that especially when you're young, you can get angry after being killed for the 8th time in Fortnite. It is a real but temporary anger, with no effect on the long term. Often the frustration comes not from the content itself, but from the other players. It's the same thing in sports. But when Zidane hit Materazzi, no one said that football makes you violent. That doesn't stop a lot of people from saying that video games are the cause of crime among young people. Except that if you look at the studies, that's not the case. If that were true, we would see a heap of crime coinciding with the release of big titles like Battlefield or Call of Duty, but that's not so. It's even the opposite in the United States. The peak of the number of murders per year was in the 1980s. Since then, it's dropped significantly. I'm not saying it's video games that made it drop, though. The second argument is that video games can be a trigger for individuals who are already violent. It's harmless for 99.9% of the population, but it might be what turns some already unstable young people around. And that's the argument that came up after a massacre at a school in the United States. 2 armed students were killing and injuring dozens of people. The world was in shock. We were looking for a reason, something to blame, and that was video games. A few years later, when a young man fired shots at a primary school, they found a collection of games at his house, one being World of Warcraft, in which he was completely immersed in the months prior to the massacre. Is it true that playing makes people commit murders? Not really. Despite all that's said, there are exceptions. In fact, unfortunately, in recent decades, this kind of tragedies become very popular in the United States. What these figures show us is that in all of the people who have committed these acts, very few play video games. Only 12%, according to a United States Secret Service report. It also says that these people consume even less than the average. If you take this this from a broader angle, Japan, for example, is the third largest consumer of video games in the world, yet its crime rate is extremely low, well below that of the United States. They play more, but they're less violent. No studies have been able to provide conclusive evidence on the link between gaming and aggressiveness. Those who do so, for the majority, have been challenged. One of them assessed the level of aggression of the patients, asking them if they wanted to have their opponent eat spicy sauce. In 2011, it was the United States Supreme Court that ended the debate. In a trial aimed at banning the sale of certain titles deemed inappropriate, they concluded that the study supposed a link between exposure to violent games and adverse effects on children, and that they did not prove that playing prompts minors to act aggressively. The effects demonstrated were both weak and indistinguishable from the effects produced by other medias. If they don't make you violent, can you get addicted to video games? You know you should put down the controller and do something else, but you can't. You'd rather keep playing over and over again. That's your parents' new argument, that games don't make you violent, but they're going to make you addicted. What does science think of that? Well, it's not a drug like cannabis or cocaine. It's not a substance that you take to artificially influence your brain. When an article says video games affect children's minds like drugs or alcohol, what they mean is that it creates dopamine, the molecule of reward, except that it's our brain itself that creates it on its own, as it does for any other pleasant activity, like reading. Unlike alcohol or cigarettes, there's no physical addiction. At best, it's a behavioral addiction. By the way, we shouldn't even talk about it as addiction. The official scientific term is gaming disorder. But how does it work? Man is conditioned to do what brings them pleasure. A part of the brain centralizes information about our basic needs. When it's been a long time since we've not had them fulfilled, it creates a desire to fill it. So the more you repeat a pleasant action, that releases dopamine. The more you do it, the more it's recorded as a need in our brain. And after a while, it becomes as important as eating or sleeping. It becomes a problem when it starts to become an obligation. We have to play. We can't stop it, even when it comes at the expense of our work, our relationships, or our health, especially as the brain naturally develops tolerance. If you only get dopamine continuously, after a while it just becomes your new standard. To be happy, you need more. The more we play, the more you need to play to receive the same level of pleasure. The thing is that other activities don't give you enough dopamine anymore. You get the impression that everything has no interest. There's only the video game that's worthy of your time, because it's the only one that can squeeze the needs out of your brain. And the video game industry is very effective at taking advantage of this. From the animation of the level up to the noise that your gun makes when you shoot, everything is considered to give you a small, immediate reward. The gameplay loops are chained to make you stuck to your screen, which is what makes them satisfying and very captivating. Some games abuse this even further, and more titles are made to be played forever, like Fortnite and its Season Pass. Many publishers use techniques similar to casinos to make as much money as possible off the addiction of their players. Electronic Arts has been firmly accused of exploiting children for their personal gain, while Brazil ranks gaming consoles in the same category as slot machines. In 2018, the UN and the World Health Organization recognized the gaming disorder as a real disease. Does that mean that all gamers are addicts? The World Health Organization itself acknowledges it does not even concern 3% of players worldwide. Several psychologists have raised doubts about this inclusion, although it can help identify some real cases. Now, all parents think that their child's affected. We often confuse addiction and passion. If you spend time playing video games, but you keep doing your job, seeing people, and you can stop without a problem, then have fun. The image of a gamer isolated in his room is just a stereotype. In good conditions, the game can be positive. You can make friends online, discover new things, and sometimes even make it a job, whether it's coding, becoming a game designer, or making videos on YouTube. But not everyone is of that opinion. This is the case in China. Recently, to fight this addiction that destroys a generation, the country has decreed that anyone under the age of 18 cannot play more than 3 hours per week. 1 hour on Fridays, 1 hour on Saturdays, and 1 hour on Sundays, except during holidays. It is true that in Asia, the issue of video game addiction is more present. In Japan, 1.5 million people stay constantly in their rooms. It's easy to point at video games, but is it really that. Many studies revealed broader problems like anxiety, depression, increasing precariousness, and increasing social problems. In the midst of this ever more complex and unfair world, games can be a refuge, an escape, and the only place where you can feel powerful and in control of our means. When your only life prospect is to work in an office for the rest of your days, a game immediately seems more attractive. Again, instead of talking about those problems, we blame the games and the players. Do video games make you smarter? A lot of bad things have been said, but what if video games could actually make you smarter? What do you think of this StarCraft champion who can do 1,000 actions per minute and 17 mouse clicks per second? It takes a huge brain to do that. This is what the other part of the study on video games is looking at. How much does it develop your cognitive functions? We had people play Mario 64 for 2 months, and at the end, compared to others, they had more gray matter in the parts of the brain that manage memory, planning, and hand mobility. According to a lot of research, video games have beneficial effects, especially in children. Of course, we don't have any concrete evidence, especially with a lot of correlation. The results tend to fall when patients play too much, but in absolute terms, one could use the video game to help people with brain problems. Some studies report real success by putting controllers in the hands of older people. Their memory works better, and the aging of their brains is slowed by 7 years. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope this video has opened your eyes to some of the secrets behind video games. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to always stay curious and never stop learning.